as a medical intuitive yourself, what are the ways that we can access information using medical intuition or using our intuitive senses?
It's such a great conversation, this, because so many people use intuitive senses without really understanding, what it is they're doing or what they could potentially expand on as well. Thank you so much for having me, Leah. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. It's so good to have you here. In particular, like I said, I'm excited to speak to you because I guess, quite frankly, I don't speak to a lot of people who are medical intuitives and do a similar thing of what I do, although that's not the only thing I do. But I'm just thrilled to pick your brain and also talk about your new book and all the things that you offer. So for those watching, her book is Essentials of Medical Intuition. And Wendie, this comes out this year, correct?
It
It's
is
already out.
already out. Yes,
It's
it
already
came
out.
out in April and it's available worldwide, as far as I understand.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, inviting, hardback book that you can order anywhere. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Now, Wendie, is this your first book or have you written others?
This is my first book, I'm proud to say. And, when you write your first book, it's like writing 5 books all at once, I think.
It is, isn't it?
It's quite an experience.
It's it's a total experience. I wrote my first one. I had no idea what I was doing. I don't know. Did you have a coach or someone helping you?
I was lucky enough to work with a publisher who was gave me a lot of feedback and great notes, and I worked with an editor, so I had some support. But I have to tell you, without that support, I'm not sure how it would have gone. But I'm very, very proud of the book, and it really did what I was hoping it would do, in that I presented a history of medical intuition along with how it can be used in healthcare, how people are using it in healthcare, and most importantly, really, the research around it and what is present for us today in terms of medical intuition.
Yes, that's wonderful. And it is a beautiful book. So before we get into what is medical intuition and all the things that you offer in your work, let's talk about what it's not, because I think a lot of people have misperceptions about what medical intuition is. So why don't you tell us some highlights of what you think it's not?
Yeah, that was another goal of mine, is to really define the field as best I could in terms of how I use it, how I teach it, and how I see it being used in the world to the best effect. Medical intuition is not a treatment. It's not a modality. It's not an intervention, which makes it a foundational process that can be used in any healthcare setting, from complementary alternative all the way to allopathic and biomedicine. And that's what's exciting about medical intuition, is that it's a very powerful skill set for assessing the physical body and the biofield.
Hmm.
And that assessment process is incredibly useful in so many ways.
It is incredibly useful. Now, for someone like myself, I call myself more of an energy healer. I don't use the term medical intuitive in my labels or identity. However, it's always been part of what I do. And so I want to open up the conversation about what medical intuition looks like and how we can experience it. Obviously, you have a lot of history and experience with that, and I'd like to share some of mine as well. So when you, as a medical intuitive yourself, what are the ways that we can access information using medical intuition or using our intuitive senses?
It's such a great conversation, this, because so many people use intuitive senses without really understanding, what it is they're doing or what they could potentially expand on as well. Most people, and I mean everyone, everyone on the planet, all humans,
Yes.
we seem to have this ability to get these hits or quick, bits of information through our intuitive senses, where we don't really know how we received it, right? So there's all kinds of intuition. There's feeling intuition, that's clairsentience, where you feel it in your body or your emotions. There's auditory intuition, clairaudience, where you hear things that are intuitive and of value. There's certainly claircognizant, which is kind of the most common one for people who say I'm intuitive. They talk a lot about just knowing something without knowing how they know it.
Mhm.
That's intuition. And then there's clairvoyance, which is clear seeing. And that word is a loaded word, right? We've heard
Yes.
that word for decades, generations, millennia. And it always evokes the idea of, the spiritual, mystical, mind reader. And that's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about is using our visualization skill, which is very common.
Mhm.
It's mind's eye. We all know what that is. It uses imagination. And that all of these pieces, all of these different clairs, you could call them, people are able to cultivate them. We just don't know that we can. So what I teach is that visual intuition piece so that people can look into the body, look at the anatomy, at the physiology, look at the life history, look at the biofield, which is the aura and the chakra system, which are like, they're drawers full. They're like filing cabinets full of
Yes.
information. So there's a lot of information we can glean through our intuitive senses. And what it takes is recognizing that we're using it and then working with it, cultivating it, developing it.
Yes. And so how do you sense? What's your intuitive skill? Which is best for you?
Well, for medical intuition, I use clairvoyance, the visual, and that's the one I teach. And, from what I understand out there in the world and through my student base, is that that's the one that is the least, what is the word? Maybe natural for people,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of people are very clairsentient. They just feel things, they know things, claircognizant, but seeing can be a little bit of a next step, right? For many
Yes.
people. How do I do that?
Yes.
Well, that does take instruction. It does take practice. It does take time. It does take cultivation. And that's what I teach, because with medical intuition, we have the opportunity to see the root causes, literally see the root causes of what's happening in the body,
Mm-hmm.
and again, in the life history, and in many, many ways that we might not have access to otherwise. That information can be so healing for people in so many ways. One of my favorite quotes, I put it in the book, is from Dean Ornish. His quote is that awareness is the first step in healing.
Mm.
And to me, that's the motto of medical intuition, is that we want to bring this to awareness.
Yes. Well, I appreciate what you're saying about that. And I'd like to share just a little bit from my perspective, just as healer to healer here or talking.
Absolutely.
I remember when I started in massage therapy and energy healing kind of simultaneously. And in the energy healing school I went to, we did a lot of channeling exercises, a lot of meditation, and a lot of studying about the mind body. For people, maybe someone listening that's interested in accessing these tools for themselves or becoming a healer or some kind of a body worker or practitioner, uh, what I found very helpful, one is the practical understanding of the body systems, our anatomy, our organs, how things function, getting kind of a map of that in general in your mind and in your experience, and also really understanding the language of the body, how the body speaks, of course, physically and expressionally, but also in our biofield and our auric field. And so when I first started, I did a lot of chakra readings, like with pendulums and so forth. And I kind of got to be, a pro at that. And as a one simple example, to your point of not diagnosing, but using it as a tool, an instrument. I remember reading this guy, and one of the reasons it's so fresh in my memory, it was in a festival or an event. I was outside in a tent and I made this makeshift healing table situation. I was doing readings in there, and I was looking into all of his chakras and all over his field, and around his heart, there was, I could physically see with the pendulum a difference in the movement of energy, and also began to feel um, some constriction there, and of course I did not say you're about to have a heart attack. I did not say anything along those lines, but I said, I think it's best for you to go to the doctor, because this pattern that I'm seeing is not just emotional or energetic. It's in your physical body. And sure enough, he had multiple blockages and he was just days away from, having an experience. And so that's, to me, it's been such since then now I kind of read through my hands. I wanted to ask what you would say about that, but I used to read through my hands, and now it's more of like I see the picture, I see the story. But that's so helpful to me as a tool to be able to support a person, whether they're having physical issues, emotional issues, mental, whatever's going on, to see where there's imbalance, to see where those old stories are showing up, to see what's kind of settled into their body to such a point where there is a physical problem. So I've really learned to lean on intuition, medical intuition, as just a general part of my work, whether I'm doing soul retrievals or readings specifically, or just general, energy healing. It's very, very useful. Do you have other people who've been able to kind of read through their hands or see the body through their hands? Is that part of what your practice is?
It's not part of my practice, but it is very, very common.
Okay.
Massage therapists, healers of all kinds, even osteopaths, DOs. There's actually research on how chiropractors and DOs, that manipulate the body, the bone structure and whatnot, that they see through their fingers. That's what they call it.
Yes. Yes.
So it's not uncommon for that to happen. You're receiving impressions intuitively through your hands. That I would call clairsentience, because that's a feeling experience. Another word for that is a very old-fashioned word. It's called psychometry, which means the sense of touch. And that is I call it a combined intuitive sense, because you might receive feeling information or hearing information or seeing information or cognizant information. So it's kind of a combined thing. And many, many healers of all kinds, healing practitioners, find that they're receiving information that way. The difference, and thank you for that, is a fantastic story, and really a case report of your working with this gentleman who was days away from a heart, issue that could have been quite serious. So medical intuition is full of those kinds of anecdotal stories. I mean, you talk to any medical intuitive who understands that's what they're doing, seeing into the body, and they will have story after story for you,
Right.
as do I.
Mm-hmm.
And these case reports are really, really important to log. And anyone listening here, and you too, Leah, write them down, keep a record, because the world needs to know, and we need to research this. And so, I don't want to segue into the research part unless you're ready for it, but I wanted to acknowledge you for that, and acknowledge everyone out there who's listening who identifies with that and says, I can do that too. The difference in terms, if there is one, in terms of what I do, is that it is a very deliberate process. So as a medical intuitive that uses it as a standalone skill and not combined with other skills, and there's a reason for that, and I can explain that. I found that intuitive process was so valuable for my clients. So let me backtrack a little and say, I also started out as an energy healer and did that for years. And in the process of doing the energy healing, my experience was not unlike yours. I was seeing into the body. I was dialoguing with the body. I was able to see the life history here and all of the pieces of it. And I found that information was so useful to the client that I was curious. And the other thing was, as an energy healer and even as a massage therapist, you'll find people coming back, clients coming back again and again with the same issue going on in their physiology or in their energy field or whatever. And I was so curious to know, why did something get stuck there, right? Why can't it just release? And sometimes people would have these wonderful releasing, experiences, and then they'd come back and they'd have it all again. So I started using medical intuition, not really knowing exactly what to call it at the time, to just assess. And I found that I did an assessment prior to a session. When I did that, the client was able to release more permanently the issue that was going on. And I thought that was fascinating. And eventually I stopped doing energy healing, although I still do it on occasion, but I stopped doing it as a practice because I saw that the intuitive session, the medical intuitive scan or reading, if you will, was so valuable for them in getting to the root cause and being able to shift that stuck energy. So that's why I call it a foundational skill.
Yes.
because you can practice it before a massage therapy session. You can practice it before an energy healing session. You
Mm-hmm.
can practice it before a, any kind of healthcare, including, allopathic. A doctor can practice it just to get the lay of the land, to see what's going on with their
Right.
patient before they go into treatments or, diagnoses or whatever it is they do. So I teach people from every spectrum of healthcare, massage therapists, certainly, all the way up to MDs,
Mm-hmm.
and all of them are using it in their field, in their way. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And similarly, like you, over the past 10 years, do less and less and less energy healing, more and more and more information, reading, scans, that kind of, because just as you're saying, it is so, the value of it for the client is tremendous.
Tremendous. It's unprecedented, really.
Yes,
Be-
and that alone can sometimes help shift the energy and start the healing practice without doing anything else.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Something shifts in the energy. I describe it in the book as permission for wellness, meaning that an energetic shift has taken place in the client's own energy
Yes,
just by hearing it. And
right.
that's such a phenomenal, and that, of course, speaks to their free will and everyone, our ability to heal.
Yes.
What is our ability to heal? Our ability to heal is giving ourselves permission to heal. And that's not, it sounds so nice and pat, but it
Right.
actually is quite complex,
It is
right?
complex and powerful. Yes. Well,
Yeah.
for everyone listening, I want to focus on a couple of keywords here so far, which is training and learning and practice, because as you said kind of briefly when you first began, and you also speak it to in the book, there's a belief that intuition and readers and intuitives and psychics and clairvoyants and medical intuitive, that there's something special about us. I believe, as I think you do, everyone has the capability to be more intuitive and to trust their intuition more. But as I said, the first schools that I went to focused on practice, 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 channeling, meditation, observing, listening, practice, practice, practice. You have a whole program teaching people how to use this visual intuitive skill. And so I just want to encourage anyone that's interested in this or fascinated by it, just for a personal purpose, that it is possible for them, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I mean, I've taught I've taught people who have said to me, I don't have an intuitive bone in my body.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, actually, you do. You were born with it.
Yeah.
We're all born with it. And the question is, do you want to cultivate it? That really is. And the way I equate it is, and when people hear this, the light bulb kind of goes on. If you wanted to learn to speak Italian, you
Mm,
wouldn't expect yourself to know Italian, right? Or some foreign language. You would do what people do. You get into a class, you practice, and you watch yourself improve, and
yes.
that's, or you go to Italy and immerse yourself or whatever it is you
Yeah.
do, but
Right.
you learn, you put yourself in an educational environment to learn a skill.
Hmm.
And people don't think of intuition as a skill.
It's a
They think of
skill.
it either as an inherent something you have or something you don't have, which is just a false notion. So I appreciate you bringing that forward.
Yeah.
Also, don't forget, we don't have a society at this point that understands intuition or respects it or even thinks it's something you can cultivate. So we're kind of swimming upstream at the moment until
Mhm.
people start to understand that this is a very natural skill.
Yes. And I appreciate you saying that so much. I don't know what age you are. It doesn't matter. We're probably about the same age. And I think it's important. One of the uphill battles I've consistently felt is that, validation and respect from the mainstream people of understanding what I do without making it quote woo woo. I'm so tired of hearing the word woo woo. And there are a lot of people who, kind of make it woo woo with their magic talk and all that kind of stuff. But you are a beautiful, intelligent, sane, put together woman here with a kind laugh. There's no woo woo about you except just you're trusting what you've experienced for yourself and bringing that forward in a very practical way. And I love the name of your school, The Practical Path, because I always use the word practical in my work as well to assure people that this
Yes.
isn't woo woo. This is very practical, down to earth.
It really, thank you for that acknowledgement. And you're right on, because it is practical, and it is also very well used in medicine. But
Mm,
not to the degree that a medical intuitive would use it, number one, and not to the degree of understanding that intuitives who are working in this area understand. And that's where I see my role. And that's really why I wrote the book. I wrote the book for healthcare practitioners. I mean, everybody can enjoy the book, and that's what's meant for them. But it's also meant to break down some of the barriers between the woo-woo
hmm.
world, or what there's perceived as that, and healthcare. And it's kind of an exciting time we live in, Leah, because right now in certain parts of the country, not everywhere, healing touch and Reiki and pranic healing and, even shamanism is
Yeah.
being welcomed into healthcare in these really interesting ways. This is unprecedented,
Yes.
right? So we're
Yes.
living in a very exciting time for this. And the integrative and functional healthcare world is looking at complementary and alternative practices
Hmm.
and integrating them. So medical intuition and all the work that you do, and energy healing and all of these things are being looked at for efficacy.
Yes.
Now, what does that mean, right? Well, that means that we need what the medical and scientific world typically um, uses as their bellwether, and frankly, understandably so, and that is empirical testing, or testing of any kind, right?
Hmm.
Scientific data that shows the efficacy or usefulness or value of a practice, or of a whatever it is that's being tested. And to that end, well before I wrote the book, years ago, I looked at what kind of research had been done on intuition and on medical intuition, and I found a lot. Interestingly, in healthcare, there's been years of research on nursing intuition. I
Mm.
mean, they're over 30 years. Uh,
Wow.
yes, the holistic nurses of the world, certainly of the United States, have started to gather. Well, they haven't. They've done lots of research on how nurses use their intuition at bedside, in the ICU, in the ER, how they do it in their job. And the research is fascinating. And I have to thank them so much, because I think that group of that demographic has done more for bringing awareness to biomedicine, conventional medicine, than any other. So bless them.
Yes.
On the physician side, it's a little more sparse. What we see there is the curiosity of physicians on how they use intuition in
Hmm.
their decision making.
Hmm.
And there are some wonderful studies out there that show the value of it and the usefulness of it. In all of these studies, I didn't see anything that really spoke to medical intuition the way I use it, and the way medical intuitives typically use it, as a very definite sort of practice of assessment, the way you described it, Leah, and the way I use it, and the way Carolyn Mace used it, right? And the way
Hmm.
Edgar Casey used
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
It's different. What they're doing really is a series of hits.
I
Those
see.
kind of hits, which are, momentary, that are
Right.
filled with information of some kind. Those hits are being called intuition, and that's not incorrect. It's just not complete.
Right.
Medical intuition is that deliberate practice where you take the time to do a
Hmm.
full scan, to see what's going on, to see the history of it. And
Hmm.
that's something that medicine hasn't even understood.
Hmm.
So what I wanted to do was to find out where medical intuition has been researched and studied. There's a handful of studies over the years, maybe 7. Well, I can't recall the number, but
Yeah.
it's not a lot. You could count them on 2 hands. And most of them have been inconclusive. And these studies were created by doctors, right? By
Mm.
scientists who wanted to know, well, there's all this anecdotal stuff. What are these people doing? Right? So when I looked at it, and I've reviewed a lot of it in the book so people can have a history of what's gone down. One of the challenges with doing this kind of research is that the nature of the process doesn't really fit well into that very tight examination, process for certain kinds of research.
I
So
see.
I believe that's why things have been a little inconclusive. I also believe that, when medical intuitives are self-trained or, mentored or something, everybody has a different style.
Right.
So sometimes that can affect the results.
Right.
So what I did, if you don't mind me explaining this part, is in 2019, I decided, there's not enough research. I think I'll do some research on my
Okay.
And I partnered with some wonderful people at the University of California, San Diego, who were interested in this and helped me create a survey for my graduate students who we have anecdotal evidence that is like, yes, 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 a lot of um, hitting their marks kind of thing. We know that we had tons of anecdotal success.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to test it, what we did was what we could do at the time is we set up a very, as blinded as we could get. Of course, we don't do any intake. And of course, we don't diagnose. We're just observing, right? And reporting on the observation. So 5 of my graduates and 67 self-selected folks from the area, and some of them were from the UCSD Medical Center patients, and some were from Scripps Memorial down in San Diego patients, and some were just people from the community that were curious. And we did sessions with them, and we recorded them in terms of what we were looking for. After the session, the participants filled out a survey. And it was anonymous, right? And we were asking for their accuracy. How accurate were the medical intuitives? Now, remember, the medical intuitives were blinded because, number one, their eyes were closed. That's how we do our process. And number two, because we don't do any intake and we had no access to health records.
Okay.
So these were fresh, cold reads, you could say. What we found from the participants was they rated the medical intuitives as 94% accurate in the location and evaluation of their primary health issue.
Wow.
Yeah, we found them 98% accurate. They were rated as 98% accurate in describing the life events or life history that could have led to this health issue. That's a really important part
Yes.
of the process, because we know that, life history really affects our bodies, right?
Yes.
So 98% accuracy there. We also found a 94% consistency for those participants who had a known medical diagnosis. They rated the medical intuitives as 94% consistent with that known diagnosis. That was a real, bell ringer there, because that's the missing piece, right? How consistent are the medical intuitives with what a doctor might see or might observe or might even diagnose, right?
Right.
So this is the start. We felt that this was really foundational. Now, that study was published in a peer-reviewed medical journal, if you can believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, which is a very respected peer-reviewed journal. We were so pleased to have it out in the world. It is the first published research on medical intuition in more than 20 years.
Wow, that's
So
great.
yeah, so we're very proud of that. And we want to build on that, do more research, find out more about this process, how it can integrate into medicine. We're on the road with that.
Yeah. Well, I want to speak to two things that you mentioned about the medical community. One being that these are unprecedented times, and yes, they are. In the Easternized modern medicine that we have now. However, if you go before that with the shamans, with the people of the world who've been using intuition, natural sources, and so forth to treat and heal, it's been going on for probably, who knows?
As long as there have been people.
As long as there have been people. Yeah. And it's
Yes.
to me, that's, the argument when I first started in this 30 years ago or so, as you are well aware, I'm sure the argument of natural stuff doesn't work, and that's not, you can't rely on that. And that's just hocus pocus, what have you, because the emphasis and the money has been funneled through the pharmaceutical companies, through our medical systems. And without starting that whole conversation, there's been a major influence about how people view healing. Aside from our self-generating and healing machines that we're in here, our bodies, the access to and the efficiency of a variety of different natural tools and resources, including intuition, are invaluable and always have been. And secondly, what I want to say is your point about the nurses and the research you found that's already been done kind of in the nurses field. I can imagine, especially in the ER and emergency situations, you don't have much to go on at all
Mhm.
besides your intuition at those points, except for whatever's visually just right in front of you in that moment. I could imagine that intuition and using that in the medical practice is probably more so than what they even understand or can put to words, because they're regularly in these dynamics and relationships. Again, I understand it's not the way that you train and the systemized kind of approach, but I would assume that they'd be using their intuition all the time or almost all the time.
Well, the feedback I get, you would assume,
Yeah.
the feedback I get and I hear from physicians when I speak at conferences is that they're so inculcated in not, it has to be empirical. It has to be that kind of
Mm.
known data. It's really ironic because uh, the doctors and the healers or whoever who do use their intuition, everybody knows. It's like you recommend those people to your friends. You've got to go see my doctor. I don't know, he's just got this something special, or
Yeah.
she's got this extra thing about her. Well, what is that? That's the ability to trust the intuition that they're receiving. Now, in medicine, you have to test. So one of the things I want to emphasize here is that as a medical intuitive, I am not biased against any form of healthcare, not at
Right.
all.
Hmm.
Drugs, surgeries,
Whatever you
every kind
need.
of whatever is needed is needed. And as a medical intuitive, I can't come into this with any bias. I wish the medical field would come into any kind of healing with no bias, and slowly they're starting to figure that one out. But
Yeah.
but that's the environment for a doctor to say to their colleague, I had this intuitive sense, or I had this feeling, gut feeling, right, that I
Mhm.
should do this. The environment to talk about it is so stifled. It's
Yes.
so looked down on. It's so taboo that this is part of the reason I wrote the book. I want that conversation to open up. And the doctors that listen to me speak say the same thing. We have to talk about this. This
Hmm.
is a valuable tool for us. Why are we so afraid of talking about it?
Well,
Right?
that's the other. So I wanted to get to that, just in personal, and of course in this way that you're referring to right now, the big word of trust, and how it is so hard for so many people to trust their own intuition
Yep.
and to trust someone else's intuition without that evidence, or some kind of tangible evidence or empirical data or whatever it is. Why do you think that is so?
Oh gosh, we have a society that, has no understanding. Well, the truth is we do have an understanding of it. We just don't call it that.
Mhm.
What's another word for clairsentience? Feeling other people's emotions, relating to it empathically. Well, the word is compassion.
Mhm.
That's a highly revered ability for people, is to feel compassion. Well, what are you doing there? You're using your intuitive ability to connect, to feel what somebody
Mhm.
else is feeling. And that is, I mean, we use intuition every day. I had a gut feeling, I had a hunch,
Right.
I just knew.
Yes.
So when we start dialoguing about this, when we start talking about this, it's important to talk about what it is, what it
Mhm.
actually is. And when you talk about this, we're talking about, I'm going to get into the serious woo-woo here, which is the word non-local,
Mhm.
non-locality. These are the scientific, that's a scientific based word, right? Scientists like to use that word non-local because they're researching what this connection is between people that is not tangible, right?
Yes.
You can't hold it in your hand.
Right.
What is this thing? Well, I think Wall Street probably runs on intuition, right?
Mhm.
They're just using their gut to,
Yeah. Right. Right. A lot of industries, we can name several, it's in these decisions that need to be made, where are we coming up with the answers?
yeah, it is a really fascinating topic to delve into. I will say there is so much empirical research, believe it or not, on non-locality. And if you just Google online, the Institute of Noetic Sciences has done a ton of research on this, for one, as others, Rupert Sheldrake, and just a bunch of people who love to talk about this. Larry Dossey, who I was fortunate to interview for the book, has written tons of books, many, many books on this subject. and he is absolutely, he waves the flag and says, we have so much research on this. Why isn't medicine, for one, taking advantage of it? Why aren't they understanding? Why aren't they allowing this, right? Everybody's concerned correctly with patient safety and client safety, as you should be,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of this has to be done ethically. And that's a huge, huge part of my program. It's a huge part of the understanding of how to use intuitive skills. I don't believe it's been taught very well out there, and I think it needs more attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might be one of the missing pieces. People don't understand the ethics of intuition and what that means.
Yes.
But it needs to be understood, because more and more people are using these kinds of skills. It's starting to get understood. Oh, it's starting to get, people are curious about it as well. They should
Right.
be. And again, this is really why I wrote my book. I want people to understand what this stuff is. And there's a whole chapter on intuitive senses and the research around that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, research, yes. And I guess I haven't done nearly the research that you have on intuition. Um, but going back to that sense of trust, I think learning how to trust your intuition is, I can understand it being scary for some people who, really crave that evidence-based information. And I understand that there needs to be kind of a more systemized approach to how the information is delivered and so forth. But I think just the inundating yourself, going back to the word practice and immersing yourself and allowing yourself to follow the lead without the filter of your mind or your ego or the fear coming in and stopping you.
Yes.
I think that that's really important. I remember the first time I did a reading for someone long time ago, again, very vivid memory. And I was terrified to say it because it sounded ridiculous, but I was talking about his tongue. I was like, why would I be talking about this guy's tongue? Well, his father had tongue cancer and throat cancer. And then this gentleman, was kind of moving along those directions too, with this inherited ancestral trauma and his lifestyle choices and so forth. So, but saying something like that can feel, and I would love you to speak on this, it can feel intimidating to learn to trust that. And I'm sure in your school, in your program, you go over this aspect quite
Oh,
thoroughly.
in depth, because we cannot cross the line with diagnosis.
Right.
That unless a student is a diagnostician themselves, but even with that, there are pitfalls because
Yeah.
of the nature of their licensure or whatever.
Yeah.
We have to wear a different hat.
I
And
just
that
mean
hat is,
trusting the intuition though.
oh,
Like,
trusting, yes. So
yes,
trusting the intuition.
yes.
Well, that's always the issue, right? That is what we are learning. That is what we learn. And certainly it's what I teach.
Mhm.
I teach many things, but one of them is trust,
Mhm.
right? And how does that happen? That happens by a number of ways. I like to call it a state of neutrality. In other words, leaving all the fears and all that stuff aside, putting all that aside, and just purely being in the moment in that non-local space, and viewing what there is to see. How we language it is very important. That's where the ethics come in, how we say what we say, and how we do what we do. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Leah, but
Yeah, no, I just for the listener, because of course everyone's not going to run out and be want to train in
right,
medical intuition, but just
right.
trusting your intuition in general for your own healthcare, for your own decisions in your life.
Without question, let me talk about that a little, because that is so important. We all want to cultivate intuition. We want to cultivate it for our own self-care, our own healthcare, right? So I'll describe that a little bit. Throughout the book, there are little exercises for you to try. Think about your intuition, think about different kinds of intuition, and journal about it, write about it, because that brings it to mind, right?
Mm.
The other thing I want to talk about is a workshop that I've developed called Medical Intuition for Healing. That's for anyone who wants to develop that conversation between their mind and their body, right? What is my body trying to tell me about this health issue? There's so much we can glean. So just for self-care and personal health care, it is invaluable. And, people who take that workshop, they take it because they know they've had intuitive hits on something going on for them. The challenge out there in the world for everyone is Western medicine may have a different way to look at something, right?
Mhm.
So you go into your doctor and say, I have a feeling it might be this, and blank slate. They may not pay attention. And the thing about medical intuition is that typically, and I know in your career too, I'm sure, we get the people who've never gotten an answer or haven't
Right.
gotten a
Yes.
satisfactory answer, or just nothing, they haven't found that through conventional medicine. So they're looking for other options. That's unfortunate, right?
Yeah.
But what we can understand from our bodies is way more than we think we can.
Mhm.
So I do teach a workshop in that, and it will be a self-study program later in the year. And that's invaluable. People love it because it gives them an opportunity to create a method for themselves of asking for information and receiving information from their own body systems. And the information can be anything, and it can be very powerful.
Yes, indeed. Well, before we close today, I want to bring up this one last topic because I talk about this ad nauseum with my clients and on my live streams and my teachings. But for those who haven't been able to absorb it or hear it from me, maybe they can hear it from you. So I want to give the opportunity there about how our emotions affect our health. And in your readings and your medical intuition, I'd like for you to speak about how perhaps emotional traumas can land or settle or create disharmony, dis-ease issues in the body.
Yeah, it is probably the foundation of our work, isn't it?
Yes.
So I'll answer that a couple of different ways. The basic tenet of medical intuition is that the body holds information based not only on physical imbalance, but also emotional, mental, spiritual, life history imbalances.
Mhm.
In the psychology world, much research has been done on something called adverse childhood experiences.
Yes.
And what those are early life traumas that have a direct line to later life health issues. Now, not just mental health or emotional health, but also physical health. So
Right.
cancer, diabetes, there's a whole raft of things that they've connected, and the CDC, believe it or not, has done this research for 40 years. So it is in the literature. What does that mean? That means that traumatic life events, and some traumas are really big and powerful, like a divorce or abuse or something like that, as well as, in my world, subtle trauma, subtle traumatic events, meaning childhood, occurrences, getting laughed at on the playground or something like that, which they don't seem, as impactful. However, they can impact our energy and
Yes.
our energetic frequency for years, really for the
Years.
rest of our lives.
Right.
So those kind of traumatic life events we're able to look at them, bring them to the surface. And why do we do that? It's because people need to process things, right? The
Mhm.
energetic signature of imbalance can continue without the processing part. That's informational,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So that's why it's important to look at this. Those are very often the root causes of, actually, they're not very often. In my world, there's always that tale. There's
Right.
always that history.
Right.
We want to find that, bring that forward,
Right.
even if it's genetic history,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yes.
Right.
Thank you for speaking to that. And that is why we need to heal and how medical intuition can help us on our own personal lives. I thank you so much for your work, Wendie. For those looking for her links and so forth, they will be on our show notes. And her book, The Essentials of Medical Intuition, can be found anywhere books are sold. Of course, my latest book, Overcoming Toxic Emotions, is available anywhere books are sold. And between the two of us, there's a lot of different courses, workshops, and support for you on your healing journey. And I thank you all for being here. And Wendie, many blessings to you and gratitude for your very thorough research and commitment to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Thanks so much.
Thank you.